The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Layla Morrison's weary shoulders as she trudged along the dusty road leading into Riverstone, a small but bustling cattle town in the Texas Territory of 1875. Her once fine blue calico dress hung loosely around her swollen belly, the fabric worn thin from months of hard travel. At 7 months pregnant, and with only $3 to her name, Layla had reached the end of her rope. The journey west had been a desperate gamble. After her husband, Thomas, died of typhoid in Chicago, leaving her penniless and with child, she'd sold nearly everything they owned to purchase a stagecoach ticket as far west as the money would take her. Rumors of opportunity and new beginnings had drawn her like a moth to flame. Now, as she approached the town's main street with her single carpetbag in hand, those dreams seemed as dry and barren as the landscape surrounding her. The town of Riverstone was typical of Western settlements, a wide main street lined with wooden buildings, some boasting false fronts to appear more substantial than they were. A general store, saloon, livery stable, and small hotel made up the heart of the business district. Layla could smell fresh baked bread from somewhere nearby, making her empty stomach twist painfully. "Excuse me, sir," she called to a passing gentleman in a worn suit. "Could you direct me to someone who might be hiring? I'm willing to do any respectable work." The man barely slowed his pace, giving her distended belly a skeptical glance. "Not much call for your condition around here, madam. Might try the hotel, but don't count on it." By midday, Layla had been turned away from the hotel, general store, and even the schoolhouse. No one wanted to hire a woman who would soon require time for childbirth. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and the afternoon heat had become almost unbearable. Perspiration dampened her hairline as she approached the Double R Ranch office, her last hope in town. The office was a small wooden structure with a sign that read Double R Ranch Garrett Reed, proprietor. With trembling hands, Layla straightened her bonnet and brushed the dust from her dress before pushing open the door. Inside, a tall man with broad shoulders stood examining papers at a desk. He turned at the sound of the door, revealing a weathered face with keen gray eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn cowboy hat. A neatly trimmed beard covered his strong jawline, and despite the heat, he looked remarkably composed in his button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. Layla swallowed hard. "My name is Layla Morrison, sir. I'm looking for work, any kind of work. I can cook, clean, so keep books. I'm a quick learner." Garrett Reed's eyes moved briefly to her pregnant belly before returning to her face. Unlike the others she'd encountered, his expression held no judgment, only thoughtful consideration. "I'm sorry, but I don't have anything available at the moment," he began. Layla's shoulders slumped. She hadn't realized how much hope she'd placed in this final attempt. "I understand. Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, blinking back tears. "Hold on," Garrett called, stepping forward. "Where are you staying, Mrs. Morrison?" She hesitated, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. I haven't secured lodging yet. I was hoping to find work first." Garrett studied her for a long moment, noting the quality of her speech, the proud set of her shoulders despite her obvious exhaustion. Something about her stirred his compassion and his curiosity. "I might have something after all," he said finally. "My housekeeper left 2 weeks ago to care for her ailing mother. Ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. It's not just me, there's a bunkhouse with 7 ranch hands. Means cooking for 8, keeping the main house in order. The work's steady and I've got enough for both of you." He nodded toward her belly. Hope flickered in Layla's chest. "Are you certain? Everyone else seemed concerned about my condition." "Everyone else isn't me," Garrett replied simply. I need someone now, and from the looks of it, you need work now. We can figure out arrangements when your time comes. Pay is $20 a month plus room and board. It was a fair offer, more than fair, considering her circumstances. Still, caution made her hesitate. Why would you hire me when no one else would? Garrett's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Mrs. Morrison, I've learned that people in desperate situations often work the hardest, and frankly, I'm tired of my own cooking. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Layla reached out and shook his hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. We do, Mr. Reed. And thank you. Garrett, he corrected. If you're going to be living in my house, we might as well use first names. I've got some supplies to pick up, then we can head to the ranch. He paused, studying her. When's the last time you ate? The question caught her off guard. Yesterday evening, she admitted. Without another word, Garrett grabbed his hat. First stop, Millie's Cafe. No employee of mine works on an empty stomach. As they walked down the dusty street together, Layla felt the curious glances of townspeople. She understood what they were thinking: a pregnant woman with no husband, leaving town with the reclusive rancher. But for the first time in months, their judgment didn't matter. She had work, she would have shelter, and her baby would have a chance. What she couldn't possibly know was how completely her life and Garrett Reed's was about to change. Millie's Cafe was a small establishment with checkered tablecloths and the delicious aroma of home cooking. Despite the late lunch hour, several tables were occupied by ranchers and townspeople finishing their meals. Conversations quieted briefly as Garrett led Layla to a corner table, pulling out her chair with unexpected courtesy. A plump woman with gray, streaked hair approached, her face lighting up. Garrett Reed, twice in 1 month must be my lucky day. Afternoon, Millie. This is Mrs. Morrison. She'll be taking over as housekeeper at the Double R. He turned to Layla. Millie makes the best food in 3 counties. Millie's kind eyes assessed Layla with open curiosity. Welcome to Riverstone, dear. What can I get for you too? I'll have the usual, Garrett said, and Mrs. Morrison will have. He looked at Layla expectantly. Whatever is hearty and quick would be wonderful, Layla said. And please call me Layla. The stew's fresh today, Millie offered. With biscuits just out of the oven. That sounds perfect, Layla agreed, her mouth watering at the thought. When Millie departed, an awkward silence fell between them. Layla found herself studying her new employer. Up close, she could see the tiny lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. Despite his imposing presence, there was something gentle in his manner. Have you been in Riverstone long? She asked, breaking the silence. 8 years, Garrett replied. Came out from Virginia after the war. Started with 50 acres and 3 cows. Now the Double R runs about 2,000 head on 15,000 acres. Layla's eyes widened. That's impressive. Just stubborn persistence, he said modestly. What brings you west, if you don't mind my asking? Layla hesitated but decided honesty was best. My husband died 4 months ago in Chicago, typhoid. There was nothing left for me there, and I'd heard there were opportunities out west. She ran a hand over her belly. I wanted to give my child a chance at a better life. Garrett nodded, his expression softening. I'm sorry for your loss. It takes courage to make such a journey, especially in your condition. Before she could respond, Millie returned with 2 plates, a steaming bowl of beef stew with fresh biscuits for Layla, and a thick steak with potatoes for Garrett. The food was as delicious as promised, and Layla had to force herself to eat slowly despite her hunger. The ranch has good water from a well near the house, Garrett explained between bites. Main house has 3 bedrooms, mine, 1 that'll be yours and 1 I use for an office. There's a decent-sized kitchen, dining room and sitting room. Nothing fancy but solid. It sounds wonderful, Layla said sincerely. After months of uncertainty, the prospect of a stable home even temporarily seemed like luxury. I should warn you about the men, Garrett continued. Good workers, all of them, but they haven't had a woman's cooking in weeks. They might stampede the first time you serve a meal. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, and Layla realized he was making a joke. She smiled in return. I'll be sure to make extra. After the meal, Garrett insisted on paying despite Layla's protests. They made their way to the general store, where he efficiently collected supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. Layla noticed he added several items that hadn't been on his original list. A bolt of soft cotton fabric, a package of sewing needles, and a jar of peach preserves. When they reached the counter, the shopkeeper, a thin man with spectacles, eyed Layla with undisguised curiosity. Afternoon, Mr. Reed. Found yourself some help, I see, Mrs. Morrison is taking over as housekeeper at the Double R, Garrett replied, his tone suggesting he wasn't interested in elaborating. The shopkeeper wasn't deterred. Traveling alone, madam? Yes, Layla answered simply, lifting her chin slightly. The man hummed, his expression dubious. Not many women in your situation come through these parts without family. Garrett placed a hand on the counter, drawing the man's attention. Mrs. Morrison's circumstances are her own business, Jenkins. Just add these items to my account. The shopkeeper flushed and hurriedly finished the transaction. As they left the store, Layla felt a rush of gratitude for Garrett's intervention. Thank you, she said quietly as they walked toward the livery where his wagon was waiting. Not everyone would be so understanding. Garrett shrugged. People talk. Best way to handle it is to give them nothing to talk about. You do your job, I'll do mine, and folks will find something else to gossip about soon enough. The wagon ride to the Double R Ranch took just over an hour. As they traveled, the landscape opened up into rolling grasslands dotted with mesquite and oak trees. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Layla caught glimpses of cowboys on horseback moving among the herds. The ranch house itself was larger than Layla had expected, a two-story structure built of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn and corral stood nearby, along with a bunkhouse and several smaller outbuildings. A kitchen garden, somewhat overgrown, occupied a fenced area beside the house. It's beautiful, Layla said as Garrett helped her down from the wagon. It's home, he replied simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. As they approached the house, a lanky young man emerged from the barn and jogged over to them. Boss, didn't expect you back so soon. Found some trouble with the south fence line. Jenkins and Hank are fixing it now. Luke, this is Mrs. Morrison, Garrett introduced. She'll be taking over as housekeeper. Mrs. Morrison, this is Luke Thompson, my foreman. Luke tipped his hat respectfully. Madam, mighty glad to have you. The boss's biscuits could break windows. Layla couldn't help but smile at the young man's earnest greeting. I'll do my best to improve the situation, Mr. Thompson. Just Luke, madam. We're not much for formalities out here. Garrett handed Luke the reins. Get the supplies unloaded and put the wagon away. I'll show Mrs. Morrison around the house. The interior of the ranch house was plain but well built, with solid furniture and clean, if sparse, decorations. A cast iron stove dominated the kitchen, along with a large wooden table that could seat at least 10. The pantry was decently stocked, though Layla could see that organization had been lacking in recent weeks. Her bedroom was on the first floor, a modest but comfortable space with a single window overlooking the garden. A pine bed frame with a straw mattress stood against one wall, accompanied by a small dresser and washstand. It's not much, Garrett said, watching her reaction. But the roof doesn't leak and the walls keep out the wind. It's perfect, Layla assured him, setting her carpetbag on the bed. I can't thank you enough for this opportunity, Mr. Reed Garrett. He nodded, seeming almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. Supper's usually at 6. Men come in from the range by then. I'll leave you to get settled. There's fresh water in the kitchen if you want to wash up. After he left, Layla sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's sudden turn of fortune. Just hours ago, she had been trudging into town with no prospects and dwindling hope. Now she had a job, a roof over her head, and the beginnings of security for her unborn child. As she unpacked her meager belongings, she found herself wondering about the solitary rancher who had taken a chance on her when no one else would. There was kindness beneath his reserved exterior, but also a sense of isolation that resonated with her own loneliness. Shaking away such thoughts, Layla rolled up her sleeves. She had work to do if she was going to prove herself worthy of Garrett Reed's unexpected trust. By 5 o'clock, Layla had transformed the kitchen. She'd scrubbed the stove until it gleamed, organized the pantry, and prepared a hearty supper of beef stew. Using some of the meat Garrett had purchased in town, fresh bread, and stewed apples for dessert. The physical work felt good after months of uncertainty and travel. Just before 6, she heard the sounds of men approaching boots on the porch, laughter, and the low murmur of conversation. She smoothed her apron nervously as the door opened and ranch hands began filing in, stopping short at the sight of her. Garrett entered behind them. Men, this is Mrs. Morrison. She'll be handling the cooking and keeping the house in order. I expect you all to show her the same respect you'd give your own mothers. 7 pairs of eyes studied her with varying degrees of curiosity and surprise. Luke, whom she'd met earlier, gave her a friendly nod. Madam, one of the older men said, removing his hat. Something sure smells good. Stew's ready whenever you are, Layla replied with a smile. Just need to wash up first. The men needed no further encouragement, lining up at the wash basin outside the kitchen door. Within minutes, they were seated around the long table, passing bowls and complimenting the food with enthusiasm that made Layla blush. Best meal I've had since leaving home, declared a young cowboy who couldn't have been more than 20. Ain't saying much considering you left home at 14, Davy. Another teased, prompting laughter around the table. Layla observed the easy camaraderie among the men. They were a diverse group ranging in age from Davy's youth to a weathered older man they called Doc, who had to be in his 60s. Despite their rough appearance, they showed surprising manners in her presence, watching their language and thanking her earnestly for the meal. Garrett sat at the head of the table, saying little but observing everything. Once or twice, Layla caught him watching her with an unreadable expression that made her cheeks warm. After the meal, the men helped clear the table without being asked another surprise before heading to the bunkhouse for the evening. Garrett remained behind, pouring himself a cup of coffee. That was the first time I've seen Hank take seconds on vegetables, he commented. You're already working miracles. Layla laughed softly as she wiped down the table. Hardly miracles, just simple cooking. Don't underestimate yourself, Garrett said, his voice serious despite the light comment. The men are happy, which makes my job easier. Layla paused, studying him. And what exactly is your job, beyond owning the ranch? You seem to work alongside them. I do, he confirmed. Can't expect men to follow orders from someone who won't get his hands dirty. I handle the business side, 2 contracts, cattle sales, supplies. And you've built all this yourself. No family to help, a shadow crossed his face. No family, not anymore. Something in his tone warned her not to press further. Instead, she changed the subject. I noticed the garden is a bit overgrown. Would you mind if I worked on it tomorrow? Fresh vegetables would be welcome, I imagine." "Help yourself," Garrett agreed. "There are tools in the shed. Just don't overdo it in your condition." "I'm pregnant, not ill," Layla replied with more sharpness than she'd intended. "I'm perfectly capable of tending a garden." To her surprise, Garrett's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I don't doubt your capabilities, Mrs. Morrison. I just don't want to lose a good housekeeper to heat stroke on her second day." The gentle teasing caught her off guard, and she found herself smiling in return. "I'll be careful. And please call me Layla." "Layla," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Good night, then. I'm usually up before dawn, but don't feel you need to prepare breakfast that early. The men can manage coffee and biscuits until a more reasonable hour." After he left, Layla finished cleaning the kitchen, her mind turning over the day's events. Garrett Reed was an enigma, gruff yet considerate, reserved yet fair. There was a story behind those watchful gray eyes, she was certain. But she reminded herself that her position here was temporary, a safe harbor until her child was born, and she could determine her next steps. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her, Layla felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The next 2 weeks established a rhythm to life at the Double R. Layla rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for Garrett and the ranch hands. The men rode out after eating, returning for a midday meal when they were working nearby, or taking packed lunches if they would be farther afield. Evenings brought them all together again for supper, which became a time of stories and laughter around the long kitchen table. Between meals, Layla tackled the house room by room, cleaning and organizing. She discovered that, while Garrett kept things functional, there were distinctly masculine oversights like the lack of curtains in most rooms and the way his clothing was haphazardly folded in drawers. Using the fabric he'd purchased in town, she began making simple curtains for the windows and discreetly reorganizing where needed. The garden became her particular joy. Despite her advancing pregnancy, she spent hours weeding, pruning, and nurturing the neglected plants. Within days, she was harvesting fresh greens for the table. Garrett silently acknowledged her efforts by building a comfortable bench in the shade where she could rest when the work became too strenuous. One morning, as Layla was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, she noticed Garrett training a young horse in the corral. She paused to watch, struck by his patience with the nervous animal. His movements were fluid and confident as he worked with the colt, speaking in low tones she couldn't quite make out. "He has a way with the wild ones." Layla startled at the voice beside her. It was Doc, the oldest of the ranch hands, who occasionally stayed behind to work on leather repairs or other tasks around the buildings. "He's very patient," she observed. Doc nodded, leaning against the porch railing. "Patience born of understanding what it's like to be broken." "That horse knows it." "What do you mean?" Layla asked, curious about this insight into her enigmatic employer. Doc seemed to consider whether he should continue. Finally, he said, "Not my story to tell in full, madam, but the war changed him, like it did many of us who fought. He came west to escape ghosts, built this place acre by acre." The old cowboy glanced at her. "First time in years I've seen him take an interest in someone else's troubles." Before Layla could respond, Doc tipped his hat and ambled back toward the barn, leaving her to ponder his words as she watched Garrett continue his gentle work with the colt. That evening, a sudden summer storm blew in from the west. Thunder rumbled across the plains as rain lashed against the windows. Layla had just finished washing the supper dishes when a particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, dropping a plate that shattered on the floor. "Are you all right?" Garrett appeared in the doorway, concern evident in his expression. "Yes, just startled," Layla replied, embarrassed as she knelt awkwardly to gather the broken pieces. "Leave that," Garrett said, moving quickly to her side. "You shouldn't be bending down like that." He offered his hand and helped her to her feet before crouching to collect the broken china himself. "I'm sorry about the plate," she said, watching as he carefully picked up the fragments. "It's just a plate," he replied with a shrug. "Plenty more where that came from." Another crash of thunder shook the house, and Layla couldn't suppress a small gasp. Garrett looked up at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The storm bothers you," she nodded, embarrassed by the admission. "I've never liked them. Silly, I know." "Not silly," he countered, disposing of the broken plate. "Come sit in the parlor. It's more comfortable and the fire helps drown out the noise." The invitation surprised her, but she followed him to the rarely used front room where a small fire crackled in the fireplace. Two worn but comfortable chairs faced the hearth, with a small table between them. "Would you like some tea?" he offered. "I'm having whiskey, but I can put the kettle on." "Tea would be lovely, thank you," Layla said, easing herself into one of the chairs. While Garrett went to prepare the drinks, Layla looked around the room with interest. Unlike the rest of the house, which was purely functional, this space held personal touches: a bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes, a small landscape painting of Virginia mountains, and a daguerreotype in a silver frame showing a young woman with Garrett's gray eyes and serious expression. When he returned with a steaming cup of tea for her and a glass of amber liquid for himself, Layla nodded toward the photograph. "Family." Garrett's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "My sister, Elizabeth. She died of influenza in '65, just after I returned from the war." "I'm sorry," Layla said softly. "Were you close?" He nodded, taking a seat across from her. "Very. Our parents died when we were young. I was 17, Lizzie just 15. We managed to keep the family farm going until the war came." He took a sip of his whiskey. "I enlisted with the Union Army." Virginia was divided in its loyalties then. "You fought for the North?" Layla asked, surprised given his Southern roots. "I fought against slavery," he corrected. "Never made sense to me that a man could own another man, but war isn't what the recruiters tell you it is." His gaze drifted to the fire, lost in memories. "By the time I came home, the farm was gone, seized for taxes while I was away, and then Lizzie." He trailed off. "So you came west," Layla finished for him. "Nothing left for me there," he agreed. "Figured I'd either find something worth living for out here or die trying." A self-deprecating smile crossed his face. "Turns out I'm too stubborn to die easily." The personal revelation touched Layla deeply. She understood all too well what it meant to lose everything and start again. "I think you've built something remarkable here," she said sincerely. Garrett's eyes met hers, searching. "What about you, Layla? What was your life before all this?" He gestured vaguely toward her pregnancy. The question was gentle, without judgment, and Layla found herself wanting to share her story with this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "I grew up in Boston," she began. "My father was a professor of literature. We lived comfortably, and I received an education unusual for a girl. But when he died, we discovered he had debts. My mother and I lost our home and most of our possessions." She sipped her tea, the warmth comforting as the storm continued to rage outside. "I became a teacher in a small school for girls. That's where I met Thomas, my husband. He was the brother of the school's headmistress, visiting from Chicago where he worked as an accountant for a shipping company. The memories were bittersweet. We married after a brief courtship. Thomas was kind, steady. We had a good life in Chicago, modest but comfortable. We'd been trying for a child for 3 years when I finally conceived." Her hand rested protectively on her belly. "Thomas was so happy, And then the typhoid came through our neighborhood. He was gone within a week. Garrett's expression was solemn. I'm sorry, Layla. Losing someone you love changes you. Yes, she agreed softly, but it also shows you what you're capable of surviving. She looked up at him. I think you understand that better than most. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition of shared experience that transcended their different circumstances. For the first time since Thomas's death, Layla felt truly seen by another person. The storm had quieted outside, the thunder now a distant rumble. Realizing how late it had grown, Layla set aside her empty teacup and prepared to stand. I should retire. Morning comes early. Garrett rose quickly to assist her, his hand steady under her elbow as she got to her feet. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that she could smell the faint scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. Thank you for the tea, she said, suddenly aware of his height and the breadth of his shoulders as he stood beside her. And the conversation. My pleasure, he replied, his voice lower than usual. Sleep well, Layla. As she made her way to her room, Layla felt a curious flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the child she carried. It was a sensation she hadn't expected to feel again, a warmth, an awareness that made her both nervous and exhilarated. That night, she dreamed not of Thomas and their past, but of gray eyes and gentle hands that somehow made her feel both protected and free. The following days brought a subtle shift in Layla and Garrett's interactions. Nothing overt changed in their daily routines, but there was a new ease between them, small moments of connection that hadn't existed before. Garrett began lingering over his morning coffee, asking Layla about her plans for the day. She found herself sharing the books she discovered on his shelves, surprised to learn they had similar tastes in literature. The ranch hands noticed the change, exchanging knowing glances when Garrett helped Layla carry water from the well or brought her wildflowers for the table that mysteriously ended up in a jar by her bedroom window. One evening in late July, nearly a month after Layla's arrival at the Double R, she was preparing supper when Garrett returned early from a day of checking the northern pastures. Something smells good, he commented, washing his hands at the kitchen pump. Chicken and dumplings, Layla replied, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. And apple pie for dessert. The men will think they've died and gone to heaven, Garrett said with a smile. Listen, I've been thinking. Your time is getting closer and Riverstone doesn't have a proper doctor. Would you consider letting me send for a midwife? There's a woman over in Cooperville who's delivered half the babies in the county. Layla paused in her work, touched by his thoughtfulness. That's very kind of you, but my time is still at least 6 weeks away, and midwives are expensive. Consider it part of your employment, Garrett said firmly. I'd sleep better knowing you had proper care when the time comes. All right, Layla agreed, sensing this wasn't a point he would concede. Thank you. Garrett nodded, satisfied. I'll send Luke to make arrangements tomorrow. He hesitated, seeming almost nervous. There's something else. The Independence Day celebration is happening in town next weekend. There'll be a picnic, some music, fireworks after dark. I thought you might enjoy getting away from the ranch for a day. The invitation caught Layla by surprise. Are you asking me to accompany you? If you'd like, he replied carefully. The men will all be going too. It's tradition to give them the day off. I'd love to go, Layla said, a warm feeling spreading through her chest at the thought of spending a day in town with Garrett. It sounds wonderful. His smile, rare and transformative, made him look years younger. Good, that's good. For the next week, an air of anticipation filled the ranch. The men talked excitedly about the celebration, debating which of the local girls might dance with them and which saloons had the best whiskey. Layla secretly altered one of her dresses, letting out seams to accommodate her growing belly, and adding fresh lace collar and cuffs from materials purchased on Garrett's last trip to town. The morning of July 4th dawned clear and promising to be hot. Layla rose early to pack a basket of food for the picnic: fried chicken, biscuits, and a fresh apple pie. By 9 o'clock, everyone was ready to depart. The ranch hands rode ahead on horseback, while Garrett helped Layla into the wagon he'd cleaned and lined with fresh straw for her comfort. "You look lovely," he said as he took his place beside her, his eyes appreciating the blue dress she'd worked so hard to refurbish. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "It's been so long since I've attended a celebration. I hope I remember how to behave in society." Garrett chuckled, urging the horses forward. "Riverstone's idea of society might surprise you. Just enjoy yourself." The journey to town passed pleasantly as they talked about everything and nothing: the weather, the cattle, books they'd both read. Layla noticed that Garrett seemed more relaxed away from the ranch, as though leaving his responsibilities behind for a day had lifted a weight from his shoulders. Riverstone was transformed for the celebration. American flags hung from every building, and bunting in red, white, and blue decorated the main street. A platform had been constructed in the town square for speeches and music, surrounded by tables laden with food brought by local families. Children ran laughing through the crowds, and the atmosphere was one of jubilant festivity. As Garrett helped Layla down from the wagon, several people approached to greet them. Layla noticed the curious glances and whispers that followed, but Garrett's presence beside her made them easier to bear. "Mr. Reed," called Millie from the cafe, hurrying over with a warm smile. "And Mrs. Morrison, how lovely to see you both." She embraced Layla as though they were old friends. "You're positively glowing, my dear. Ranch life must agree with you." "It does," Layla agreed, realizing with surprise that it was true. Despite her condition and the hard work, she had never felt healthier or more content. "You must come meet everyone," Millie insisted, taking Layla's arm. She glanced at Garrett. "You don't mind if I steal her for a bit, do you? The ladies have been dying to meet your mysterious housekeeper." Garrett looked to Layla, silently asking if she was comfortable with the arrangement. When she nodded, he stepped back. "I'll find you for the picnic at noon," he promised. For the next 2 hours, Layla was introduced to what seemed like the entire female population of Riverstone. There were farmers' wives, shopkeepers' daughters, and the formidable Mrs. Holloway, wife of the town's only lawyer and self-appointed arbiter of local society. To Layla's relief, most of the women were welcoming, eager for a new face and fresh conversation. "So you work for Mr. Reed," Mrs. Holloway stated rather than asked, her sharp eyes assessing Layla's condition. "In your delicate state, I do," Layla replied evenly. "Mr. Reed has been very accommodating." "I'm sure he has," Mrs. Holloway replied with a meaningful arch of her eyebrow. Millie intervened before Layla could respond. "Eliza Holloway, don't you start with your insinuations. Garrett Reed is the most honorable man in this county, and Mrs. Morrison is a respectable widow. Now, why don't you go check on the lemonade table? I think they're running low." When the older woman had departed with a huff, Millie squeezed Layla's hand. "Don't mind her. She's been trying to marry Garrett off to her niece for years. Makes her prickly about any woman who gets within 10 feet of him. There's nothing between Mr. Reed and myself beyond employment," Layla felt compelled to clarify, though the words felt strangely hollow. Millie's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "If you say so, dear. But I've known Garrett Reed for 8 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." Before Layla could process this revelation, a bell rang announcing the start of the picnic. She made her way to the large oak tree where Garrett had spread a blanket, their basket waiting alongside several others. "Survived the ladies of Riverstone, I see," he greeted her with a smile. "Barely," Layla laughed, easing herself down onto the blanket. "Mrs. Holloway is quite formidable." "That's the politest description of Eliza Holloway I've ever heard," Garrett replied dryly, helping her arrange her skirts. "What did she have to say?" "She seemed concerned about my working for you in my condition," Layla said carefully. Garrett's expression darkened. "People talk without knowing the facts. Does it bother you?" "Not for myself," Layla admitted, "but I wouldn't want to damage your reputation in town." "My reputation can withstand a few whispers," he assured her, unpacking their food. "I'm more concerned with your comfort." As they ate, Layla observed the festivities around them. Families gathered in groups, sharing food and conversation. Young couples strolled arm in arm while children played games nearby. It was a scene of community and connection that made her achingly aware of her status as an outsider. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, noticing her pensive expression. "Just that it's been a long time since I felt part of something like this," she answered honestly. "After Thomas died, I was so focused on survival that I forgot what it was like to simply enjoy a beautiful day." Garrett's hand moved to cover hers, a gesture so natural she didn't think to pull away. "You deserve to enjoy many beautiful days, Layla." The warmth of his touch and the sincerity in his voice stirred something within her, a longing she had thought buried with her husband. Before she could respond, however, the afternoon's entertainment began with the mayor's speech, followed by a group of local musicians taking the stage. As fiddles struck up a lively tune, couples began to gather for dancing in the cleared area before the platform. Garrett stood and offered his hand to Layla. "Would you dance with me?" She hesitated, gesturing to her belly. "I'm hardly in dancing condition." "It's a slow waltz," he countered. "One dance won't hurt, unless you'd rather not be seen dancing with your employer." There was something in his tone, a vulnerability beneath the teasing that made it impossible to refuse. "One dance," she agreed, taking his hand. Garrett led her to the edge of the dancing area, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while holding her other hand in his. Despite his rugged appearance, he moved with surprising grace, guiding her gently to the music's rhythm. "Where did a rancher learn to waltz?" Layla asked, acutely aware of his nearness. "Virginia society," he replied with a hint of amusement. "My mother insisted we learn all the social graces even after she was gone. Said no child of hers would embarrass the family name at a ball." "She would be proud," Layla said softly. "You dance beautifully." His eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them, only with the right partner. For the span of that dance, the whispers and stares around them faded away. Layla was conscious only of Garrett's steady presence, the way his hand supported her with strength and gentleness, the faint scent of soap and leather that surrounded him. When the music ended, she felt strangely bereft as he released her and stepped back. The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant blur of activities: sack races for the children, a pie judging contest, which Layla's apple pie won to her delight and Garrett's obvious pride, and more music. As the sun began to set, anticipation built for the fireworks display. Garrett led Layla to a small hill just outside town where they would have a clear view. He spread a blanket on the grass and helped her sit comfortably, then settled beside her as darkness fell. "Thank you for today," Layla said, watching as stars appeared one by one in the deepening blue above them. "It's been wonderful." "I'm glad," Garrett replied, his voice low. "You deserve good days, Layla. I hope there will be many more." Before she could respond, The first firework exploded overhead in a burst of red and gold. Layla gasped with delight as more followed, illuminating the night sky with cascades of color and light. Without thinking, she reached for Garrett's hand, needing to share her joy with someone. He entwined his fingers with hers, the gesture feeling both new and somehow familiar. They sat in comfortable silence as the display continued, connected by their clasped hands and the shared experience of beauty. When the final burst of light faded and darkness returned, neither moved immediately to break the contact. Finally, Garrett spoke, his voice unusually hesitant. "Layla, I know your situation is temporary. You came here needing work and I needed help, but these past weeks—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I've come to care for you, more than I expected, more than might be proper given our arrangement." Her heart quickened at his words. "Garrett, you don't need to say anything," he continued quickly. "I understand your heart belongs to your husband's memory, and you have your child to think about. I just wanted you to know that whatever you decide after the baby comes, there's a place for you both at the Double R, if you want it." The offer and the feeling behind it overwhelmed her. Tears welled in her eyes and she squeezed his hand. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Garrett assured her. "Just think about it. There's time." As they made their way back to the wagon for the journey home, Layla felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. Garrett's declaration hadn't been a passionate avowal of love, but something perhaps more meaningful, an offer of security, of belonging, of a future she had thought lost forever. What scared her most was how desperately she wanted to accept. The weeks following the Independence Day celebration brought subtle but significant changes to life at the Double R Ranch. Garrett sought out Layla's company more openly, joining her in the garden in the evenings or lingering after supper to discuss books or ranch business. For her part, Layla found herself looking forward to these moments, her heart lifting whenever Garrett entered a room. August arrived with relentless heat that made everyone on the ranch move a little slower. Layla's pregnancy had advanced to the point where even simple tasks left her breathless, though she stubbornly continued her duties despite Garrett's increasing concern. "You need to rest more," he insisted one evening after finding her mopping the kitchen floor. "The baby will come soon and you need your strength." "I'm perfectly capable," Layla began, only to be interrupted by a sharp pain that made her gasp and clutch the edge of the table. Garrett was at her side instantly, his arm supporting her. "What is it? Is it the baby?" "Just a strong kick," Layla assured him, though uncertainty flashed across her face. "The midwife said it could be another 3 weeks." "Babies don't always follow schedules," Garrett replied, his brow furrowed with worry. "Promise me you'll take it easier. Please, Layla." The genuine concern in his eyes made it impossible to refuse. "All right, I promise." True to his word, Garrett had arranged for Mrs. Beulah Jackson, the midwife from Cooperville, to stay at the ranch beginning the following week. Preparations for the birth occupied much of Layla's thoughts as she put together a layette from the fabric Garrett had provided and set up a corner of her room with a cradle he had mysteriously produced from the attic. "It was Elizabeth's," he explained when Layla asked about its origins. "I brought it west, thinking someday." He trailed off, then shrugged. "It should be used." The simple gesture touched Layla deeply. Each day brought new evidence of Garrett's care, fresh wildflowers by her bedside. A rocking chair moved to the porch where she could enjoy the evening breeze. Special treats from town that appeared without explanation. The ranch hands watched these developments with knowing smiles, particularly Luke, who had appointed himself Layla's unofficial protector, always ready to carry heavy items or fetch water when she needed it. "Boss is smitten, madam," Luke commented one afternoon as he helped her hang laundry. Never seen him like this before. Layla felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Reed is simply being kind to an employee in a delicate condition. Luke's grin suggested he knew better. If you say so, madam, but the way I see it, you've brought something to this place it was missing, and to him too. Before Layla could respond, a rider appeared in the distance, approaching the ranch at a gallop. Luke shaded his eyes. That's Doc Peterson. He's riding mighty fast for a social call. Doc Peterson was the circuit doctor who visited isolated ranches and farms every few months. His unexpected appearance sent a ripple of concern through Layla. By the time the doctor reached the yard, Garrett had emerged from the barn and was waiting to greet him. "Peterson," Garrett nodded, "didn't expect to see you until fall." "Wish it was a routine visit," the doctor replied grimly, dismounting. "Got measles in Cooperville. Bad outbreak. I'm riding to all the outlying places to warn folks." Layla felt a chill despite the August heat. Measles could be deadly, particularly for the very young and the elderly. How bad? Garrett asked, his expression grave. 5 dead already, mostly children. The Widener baby, 2 of the Cooper kids, old Mrs. Harmon and Beulah Jackson's youngest grandson. The doctor's tired face reflected the toll of the losses. Mrs. Jackson. Layla stepped forward, one hand protectively over her belly. "The midwife," Doc Peterson nodded. "She's nursing her daughter's family now, won't be traveling anywhere for weeks, I'm afraid. Which brings me to another matter." He turned to Garrett. "Reed, I understand Mrs. Morrison is expecting soon. With Beulah unavailable, you might want to consider taking her to Fort Collins where there's a proper hospital." "Fort Collins is 3 days hard travel," Garrett objected. "In her condition, I could stay," the doctor interrupted, "but I've got 2 other expectant mothers closer to term. Can't promise I'll be available when her time comes." A tense silence fell as the implications became clear. Layla might have to face childbirth with no medical assistance beyond what the ranch could provide. "I'll be fine," Layla said with more confidence than she felt. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, many without doctors or midwives. "Many have died doing so," Doc Peterson replied bluntly. "Particularly first-time mothers." Garrett's jaw tightened. "We'll figure something out. In the meantime, what can we do about the measles?" "None of my men have shown symptoms. Keep them away from town for at least 3 weeks, the doctor advised. "The incubation period is about 12 days. If no one shows symptoms by then, you're probably safe. I've got some information about treating it if cases do appear." He handed Garrett a folded paper. "Basic care, keep them cool, plenty of fluids, darkened room for the eyes." After providing a few more details about the outbreak, Doc Peterson departed, promising to return in a week to check on Layla if his other patients didn't need him. His visit left a pall over the previously cheerful atmosphere of the ranch. That evening after supper, Garrett asked Layla to join him in the parlor. His expression was troubled as he poured her a cup of tea. "I don't like this situation," he said without preamble. "You need proper medical care for the birth." "I'll be all right," Layla assured him, though her own fears had been growing since the doctor's visit. "Many women manage without doctors." "I'm not willing to take that risk," Garrett replied firmly. "Not with you, not with the baby." The intensity in his voice made Layla's heart skip. "What alternative do we have? Fort Collins is too far, and I couldn't bear to go alone." Garrett was silent for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with some internal debate. Finally, he set down his glass and met her eyes directly. "Marry me," he said simply. Layla stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me?" Garrett repeated, moving to kneel beside her chair. "I know it's sudden and I'm not explaining this well, but hear me out." He took her hand in his touch gentle but sure. If we're married, I can take you to Fort Collins myself. I can stay with you, make sure you and the baby have everything you need. Garrett, I can't ask you to, you're not asking. I'm offering. His gray eyes held her steadily. Layla, these past months. You've brought life back to this house, to this ranch, to me. I care for you deeply. More than I thought possible after everything I've lost. Tears welled in Layla's eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. But the baby isn't yours, it's Thomas's child. I know that, Garrett said softly. And I would honor his memory by caring for his child as my own, if you'll let me. Is this only because of the baby coming? Layla had to ask, needing to understand his motives fully. Garrett shook his head. No. I've been thinking about this since the 4th of July. Before then, if I'm honest with myself. The doctor's news just made me realize I shouldn't wait to ask. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not Thomas. I know I can never replace him in your heart. But I'm offering you and your child a home, protection, and a man who will spend every day trying to make you happy. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't merely a practical arrangement he was proposing, but something far more meaningful. Layla found herself remembering all the small kindnesses, the conversations by firelight, the way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. I don't know what to say, she whispered, overwhelmed by emotion. Say you'll think about it, Garrett replied. That's all I ask for now. Layla nodded, her mind whirling with possibilities. I will. That night, sleep eluded her as she considered Garrett's proposal. Marriage had not been in her plans when she came west. She had expected to find work, have her baby, and somehow forge a life for them both. The idea of remarrying so soon after Thomas's death brought complicated feelings of guilt and uncertainty. Yet there was no denying what her heart was telling her. In the months since arriving at the Double R, Garrett Reed had become essential to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. His quiet strength, his unexpected tenderness, the way he made her feel both protected and respected, these things had gradually woven themselves into the fabric of her daily life. And there was the practical consideration. Her child would have a father, a home, security. The Double R was already beginning to feel like where she belonged. By morning, Layla had made her decision. She found Garrett at breakfast, sitting alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and account book spread before him. Yes, she said simply, standing in the doorway. Garrett looked up, momentarily confused, then understanding dawned in his eyes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, Layla clarified, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. If the offer still stands. Garrett rose from the table so quickly his chair nearly toppled backward. In 3 strides he was before her, taking her hands in his. Are you certain? He asked, searching her face. I don't want you to feel pressured because of the situation. I'm certain, Layla assured him. This isn't just about practical considerations, Garrett, these past months. I've come to care for you too. Deeply. I never expected to find this kind of connection again, especially not so soon. But life doesn't always follow our expectations. The smile that transformed Garrett's face was like sunrise breaking over the plains, warm, radiant, full of promise. Without a word, he drew her gently into his arms, embracing her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. I'll make you happy, Layla, he murmured against her hair. I swear it. You already do, she replied, allowing herself to rest against his solid warmth. They were married 3 days later in Riverstone's small church. Despite the measles outbreak keeping many townspeople away, Millie was there, beaming with approval, along with Luke and Doc, who had elected to remain at the ranch as representatives of the other hands. Reverend Wilson performed a simple ceremony. Layla wore a dress Millie had helped alter, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Garrett, usually seen in work clothes, had donned a clean white shirt and dark suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. When it came time for the vows, Garrett's voice was clear and unwavering. "I, Garrett James Reed, take you, Layla Catherine Morrison, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to cherish and protect you and your child, to be faithful and true in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, for as long as we both shall live." Layla's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her own vows, emotion welling within her at the unexpected turn her life had taken. When Reverend Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett's kiss was gentle but filled with promise that made her cheeks flush and her heart race. The small party shared a wedding supper at Millie's Cafe before Garrett and Layla departed for Fort Collins. They would travel in the ranch's most comfortable wagon, which Luke and the men had outfitted with a mattress, pillows, and a canvas cover for privacy and protection from the elements. "Take good care of her, boss," Luke said as he helped load their luggage. "And yourself, too." "The ranch is in your hands until we return," Garrett reminded him. "Send word if there's trouble." The journey to Fort Collins took 4 days rather than the usual 3, as Garrett insisted on frequent stops for Layla's comfort. They traveled in the cool morning hours and late afternoon, resting during the hottest part of the day. Each night, they made camp by streams or sheltered areas, Garrett attending to every detail of their comfort with devoted attention. Despite the circumstances that had hastened their marriage, these days on the trail created a surprising intimacy between them. Without the distractions of ranch work or household duties, they talked for hours beside the campfire about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Garrett spoke of the war in ways he never had before, sharing the horrors he had witnessed and the guilt he still carried for surviving when so many hadn't. Layla told him about her life with Thomas, their hopes for a family, and her terror when she realized she would face motherhood alone. "You're not alone anymore," Garrett reminded her, his arm around her shoulders as they watched stars appear in the vast prairie sky. "Whatever comes, we face it together now." On the 4th evening, they reached Fort Collins, a substantial town with proper streets, a courthouse, and most importantly, a small hospital run by nuns. Garrett secured a room at the town's best hotel and arranged for Layla to be examined by the hospital's doctor the following morning. "Everything appears normal," Dr. Roberts assured them after examining Layla. "The baby is positioned correctly, and your health is good, Mrs. Reed. I would estimate you have approximately 2 weeks until delivery, possibly less." The news brought both relief and a new anxiety. Garrett immediately secured a promise from the doctor to attend the birth when the time came, regardless of the hour. For the next 10 days, they settled into an unexpected honeymoon of sorts. Free from responsibilities, and with the baby's arrival still ahead, they explored the town together, dined at the hotel's restaurant, and continued the intimate conversations that had begun on their journey. Physical intimacy remained respectful and limited given Layla's condition, gentle kisses, hand-holding, and the comfort of sleeping beside one another. Yet there was an undeniable current of attraction building between them, evident in lingering glances and the way Garrett's breath would catch when Layla smiled at him in a certain way. On the evening of their 11th day in Fort Collins, Layla was reading by the window while Garrett wrote letters at the small desk. A sudden sharp pain made her gasp and drop her book. Garrett was at her side instantly. "What is it?" "I think," Layla began, only to be interrupted by another pain and a rush of fluid soaking her skirts. "The baby is coming." The next hours were a blur of activity. Garrett carried Layla to the hospital despite her protests that she could walk. "Doctor." Roberts was summoned, and the nuns prepared a private room with efficient calmness that helped soothe Layla's rising panic. "I'm staying with her," Garrett informed the doctor in a tone that brooked no argument. Dr. Roberts raised an eyebrow. "It's not customary for husbands to be present during delivery." "I don't give a damn about custom," Garrett replied evenly. "My wife needs me, and I'm not leaving her side." Perhaps it was the intensity in Garrett's eyes or the way Layla clutched his hand, but the doctor relented with a nod. "Very well, but you'll follow my instructions precisely." What followed was the most challenging night of Layla's life. The labor progressed steadily but painfully, each contraction more intense than the last. Through it all, Garrett remained her anchor, wiping her brow with cool cloths, supporting her back when she needed to change positions, murmuring encouragement when her strength seemed to fail. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her during a particularly difficult moment. "You can do this, Layla. I'm right here with you." Near dawn, after 14 hours of labor, Dr. Roberts announced she was ready to push. Garrett moved behind Layla on the bed, supporting her upper body as she gathered her remaining strength for the final stage. "I see the head," the doctor called. "One more good push, Mrs. Reed." With a cry that seemed torn from her very soul, Layla gave one last mighty effort. Seconds later, a different cry filled the room, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "You have a daughter, doctor," Roberts announced, lifting the squirming, red-faced infant for them to see. "A perfect little girl." Tears streamed down Layla's face as the nurse placed the swaddled infant in her arms. She was tiny yet complete, 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair and eyes that, when they briefly opened, seemed to mirror the gray of a stormy sky. "She's beautiful," Layla whispered, overwhelmed by love for this small person she had carried for so long. When she looked up at Garrett, she was startled to see tears on his cheeks as well. He reached out with a trembling finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. "She's perfect," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." The nurse approached gently. "Have you chosen a name?" Layla hesitated. She and Thomas had discussed names before his death, but none of them seemed right for this child born in such different circumstances than they had planned. "Elizabeth," she said suddenly, looking to Garrett. "After your sister, Elizabeth Catherine Reed." She paused, watching his reaction. "If that's all right with you." Garrett's expression was one of stunned disbelief, followed by such profound gratitude that words seemed inadequate. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed Layla's forehead, then the baby's. "It's more than all right," he managed finally. "It's perfect." As the first rays of morning sun filtered through the hospital window, illuminating this newly formed family, Layla felt a sense of completeness she had thought forever lost after Thomas's death. The journey that had begun in desperation, a pregnant widow begging for work, had led her to this moment, this man, this new beginning. Elizabeth Catherine Reed, born of one love and welcomed by another, slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware of the remarkable story that had brought her safely into the world. 2 weeks after Elizabeth's birth, Dr. Roberts declared both mother and child healthy enough to travel. The return journey to the Double R was taken at an even more leisurely pace than their trip to Fort Collins, with frequent stops to tend to the baby's needs. They arrived home to find the ranch thriving under Luke's careful management. And a welcome surprise, the men had worked together to expand and improve Layla's garden, adding a small gazebo where she could sit with the baby during pleasant weather. "Figured the little miss would need some shade," Doc explained gruffly when Layla's eyes filled with tears at the gesture. Life settled into a new rhythm centered around Elizabeth's needs. Garrett proved to be an attentive and natural father, as comfortable cradling the infant in his strong arms as he was breaking wild horses. He often brought the baby into his office while Layla rested, conducting ranch business with Elizabeth sleeping against his chest. The men adopted a collective role as protective uncles, bringing small gifts: a carved wooden rattle from Doc, a tiny blanket purchased in town by Luke, wildflowers arranged in a jar by young Davy. Even Mrs. Holloway from town grudgingly acknowledged the baby's arrival with a hand-knitted bonnet, delivered by Millie with considerable amusement at the older woman's change of heart. One evening in late October, with Elizabeth asleep in her cradle, Garrett found Layla on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the plains in shades of gold and crimson. "She's down for the night?" he asked, joining her on the swing. "For a few hours at least," Layla replied with a tired smile. "She's starting to sleep longer stretches." Garrett's arm slipped naturally around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. Over the weeks since Elizabeth's birth, their physical closeness had grown more comfortable, more essential to them both. Yet they had not yet shared the full intimacy of marriage, both understanding without discussion that Layla needed time to heal, physically and emotionally. "I have something for you," Garrett said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her hand. "I ordered it before we left Fort Collins. It arrived today." Curious, Layla opened the pouch. Inside was a gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond, flanked by tiny sapphires that matched the color of her eyes. "Garrett," she breathed, stunned by the unexpected gift. "It's beautiful. When we married, it was so rushed there wasn't time for a proper ring," he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I wanted you to have something worthy of you, of what you mean to me." Layla looked up at him, her heart full. "Our marriage may have begun suddenly, but that doesn't make it any less real to me." "Nor to me," Garrett agreed, taking the ring and sliding it onto her finger where it fit perfectly. "Layla, I need you to know something. When I asked you to marry me, it was because I cared deeply for you and wanted to ensure you and the baby would be safe. But these past months, watching you bring our daughter into the world, seeing you as a mother, building this life together, what I feel for you now goes far beyond caring." He took both her hands in his eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "I love you, Layla Reed, completely, with everything I am." The words she had been feeling in her own heart for weeks, yet hadn't dared to voice, now hung in the air between them. Layla felt tears of joy well in her eyes. "I love you too, Garrett," she whispered. "I wasn't looking for love when I came here. I didn't think it was possible to feel this way again. But you, your kindness, your strength, the way you've embraced Elizabeth as your own, how could I not love you?" The kiss they shared then was different from the gentle, restrained ones that had come before. This was a kiss of promise fulfilled, of passion finally acknowledged, of a future stretching bright before them. When they finally drew apart, breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I thought I'd lost my chance at happiness when Elizabeth died and I came west. I never imagined that a desperate prayer would be answered by a pregnant woman looking for work." Layla smiled, remembering that fateful day in his office. "You said you had enough for both of us." "I didn't know then how true that would be," Garrett replied, his voice tender. "There's more than enough love in my heart for you and Elizabeth and any other children that might come along." The hint of a question in his words made Layla's cheeks warm. "I would like that," she admitted softly. "To give Elizabeth brothers or sisters someday, to build our family together." Garrett's answering smile was full of promise. "We have all the time in the world now, and all the love we need." As night fell over the Double R Ranch, bringing with it a canopy of stars and the gentle sounds of the prairie, Layla Reed knew with absolute certainty that the difficult journey that had brought her west had led exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a man who had enough love for both her and her child, and in a place that had truly become home. 5 years later, the spring roundup at the Double R Ranch was in full swing. Cowboys moved among the herd, cutting out calves for branding while dust rose in clouds beneath hooves and horses. From her vantage point on the porch, Layla Reed could just make out her husband's tall form directing operations from atop his favorite stallion. "Mama, look." 5-year-old Elizabeth called excitedly, pointing to a rider breaking away from the main group and heading toward the house. "Papa's coming." Sure enough, Garrett had spotted them and was cantering homeward, his face breaking into a broad smile as he drew closer. In the 5 years since their marriage, the lines around his eyes had deepened slightly, but they were lines of happiness now, not the grim marks of solitude she had first observed. "Is James awake?" Garrett called as he dismounted, referring to their 2-year-old son who had been napping when Garrett left that morning. "Just woke up," Layla confirmed, shifting the bundle in her arms, their newest addition, 1-month-old Catherine. "He's helping Anna in the kitchen." As if on cue, a sturdy little boy with Garrett's gray eyes and Layla's dark hair burst through the screen door, followed by the teenage girl who helped Layla with the children and housework. "Papa!" James shouted, launching himself off the porch with complete faith that his father would catch him, which, of course, Garrett did, swinging the boy high before settling him on his hip. "How's my cowboy?" Garrett asked, tousling the boy's hair affectionately. "I helped make biscuits," James announced proudly, "for the branding dinner." "Best biscuit maker in the territory," Garrett declared solemnly, winking at Anna, who grinned and retreated back into the kitchen. Climbing the porch steps, Garrett leaned down to drop a kiss on Elizabeth's head before joining Layla on the swing. His arm slipped around her shoulders in the familiar gesture that still, after all these years, made her heart beat a little faster. "And how are my girls?" he asked, peering at the sleeping infant nestled against Layla's chest. "We're well," Layla replied, leaning into his embrace. "Catherine decided to sleep for 3 hours straight this afternoon, a new record." "Smart girl," Garrett murmured, gently brushing a finger over the baby's downy head. "Takes after her mother." Elizabeth climbed onto the swing beside them, squeezing into the small space between Garrett and the armrest. "Luke said I can ride my pony to help with the calves tomorrow if you say it's all right," she informed her father seriously. Garrett pretended to consider this momentous request. "Well, if Luke thinks you're ready and Mama agrees, I suppose we could try. Just the close pasture, mind you." Elizabeth's face lit up with excitement. "I'll be careful, I promise." "I know you will, sweetheart," Garrett assured her. "You're a natural on horseback, just like your mother." Layla raised an eyebrow at this. "I believe you're the one who taught me to ride properly. I was a city girl, remember?" "Not anymore," Garrett replied with a grin. "Mrs. Holloway said just last Sunday that you're the finest horsewoman in the county, and you know she doesn't give compliments easily." It was true that Layla had embraced ranch life wholeheartedly. Under Garrett's patient tutelage, she had learned to ride, to help with cattle when needed, even to shoot a rifle with reasonable accuracy. The tentative widow who had arrived at the Double R 6 years ago had been transformed into a confident rancher's wife, respected throughout the community. The ranch itself had prospered as well. With Layla's careful management of the household accounts and Garrett's expanding herd, they had been able to purchase additional acreage, build a new barn, and hire more hands. The Double R was now one of the most successful operations in the territory. "Luke says the branding should be finished by sunset," Garrett said, reaching over to take Catherine from Layla's arms. The baby stirred briefly before settling against her father's broad chest with a contented sigh. I told the men we'd feed them well for their hard work. Anna and I have been cooking since dawn, Layla assured him. There's enough to feed twice the crew. James, growing restless, slid down from Garrett's lap. Can I go watch the branding, Papa? I'll stay with Luke. Garrett exchanged a glance with Layla, who nodded slightly. All right, son. But you listen to everything Luke tells you and stay out of the way of the cattle. I will, the boy promised, already racing toward the corral where his small boots and hat waited by the fence. I'll keep an eye on him, Elizabeth declared, clearly feeling the weight of her status as oldest sibling. She followed her brother at a more dignified pace, her braids bouncing against her back. Alone with the sleeping infant, Garrett and Layla sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching their older children join Luke at a safe distance from the branding activity. Sometimes I can hardly believe this is our life, Layla said softly. When I think of that day I walked into your office, desperate and afraid. Best day of my life, Garrett replied without hesitation, even if I didn't know it at the time. Layla turned to study his profile, the strong jaw now familiar under her fingertips, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the silver beginning to thread through his hair at the temples. You ever regret it? She asked, the question surprising even herself. Taking on another man's child, marrying a woman you barely knew. Garrett looked at her with the same intensity that had first captured her attention years ago. Not for a single moment, he said firmly. Elizabeth is as much my daughter as James and Catherine are my children. And you. His free hand came up to cup her cheek. You are the heart of everything good in my life, Layla Reed. The only regret I could ever have is that it took 36 years for me to find you. The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tighten with emotion. I feel the same way, she whispered. I love Thomas, and I'll always honor his memory. But what we've built together, you and I, it's beyond anything I could have imagined. We've been blessed, Garrett agreed, looking out at their expanded ranch, their healthy children, the life they had created from what had begun as an act of desperate courage on her part and unexpected compassion on his. A shout from the corral drew their attention. Luke was lifting James onto his shoulders to give the boy a better view of the proceedings, while Elizabeth stood importantly holding the reins of Luke's horse, her posture mirroring her father's natural authority. I should get back, Garrett said reluctantly, carefully returning the sleeping Catherine to Layla's arms. But I was thinking with the roundup nearly finished, maybe we could take a trip to Denver next month. The railroad makes it an easy journey now. We could stay at that hotel you liked, see some shows, buy some new things for the house and the children. The suggestion delighted Layla. Though she had come to love ranch life, she still enjoyed occasional ventures into the bigger cities that were becoming more accessible as the West developed. That sounds wonderful, she agreed. Anna is perfectly capable of managing things here for a week. Garrett stood, stretching his tall frame before leaning down to kiss her a proper kiss that, even after 5 years of marriage, still made her heart race. I love you, Mrs. Reed, he murmured against her lips. And I love you, Mr. Reed, she replied, the words as true now as the first time she had spoken them on this very porch. As Garrett strode back toward the corral, pausing to swing Elizabeth up onto his shoulders as James had been on Luke's, Layla looked down at the sleeping infant in her arms. Catherine's tiny features were peaceful in sleep, secure in the knowledge, even at her young age, that she was surrounded by love and protection. The same security Layla had found that day when, desperate and with child, she had begged for work from a solemn-faced rancher who had simply said, I've got enough for both. He'd had enough, then enough compassion, enough decency to take a chance on a stranger in need. What neither of them could have known was how that simple act of kindness would grow into the abundant life they now shared, a life rich with love, family, and purpose. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the Double R Ranch in hues of gold and promise, Layla Reed offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here to this place, to this man, to this life that had transformed her deepest despair into her greatest joy.